17 species had already died trying to claim the world called Ashfall. 9. And the Velthary Empress wanted to add one more to the list. The Galactic Assembly Hall stretched across 3 kilometers of polished obsidian. 1,000 delegations sat in curved rows that rose toward a ceiling filled with artificial stars. Every major species in the known galaxy had sent their representatives here. Every minor species had begged for a seat. This was where empires were built and broken with words alone. Empress Siritha of the Velthary Dominion stood at the central platform, her silver scales catching the light in ways that made her seem to glow. She was tall, elegant, and terrifying in the way that only true predators could be. Her empire controlled 47 star systems. Her military had never lost a war. Her smile had ended more political careers than any weapon. Today, she was smiling. "My friends," she said, and her voice carried to every corner of the hall. "The Dominion wishes to demonstrate our commitment to galactic unity. We offer a gift to any species brave enough to accept it." The holographic display behind her flickered to life. A planet appeared, rotating slowly. Red and black dominated its surface. Rivers of molten rock carved paths across continents of volcanic ash. Storms swirled in its atmosphere, clouds heavy with acid and lightning. Ashfall 9, the Empress continued. A world of unlimited potential, rich in minerals, strategic in location. We offer it freely to any species that can successfully colonize it within one standard galactic year. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Everyone knew about Ashfall 9. The Velthary had tried to colonize it twice and failed. The Koreshi had lost an entire settlement to a volcanic eruption. The Morvathi had managed 3 months before their colonists went mad from the constant seismic activity. The list went on. 17 attempts. 17 failures. This was not a gift. This was a trap. The species that succeeds, the Empress added, her smile growing wider, will gain permanent sovereignty over the world and a senior position in assembly voting rights. The species that fails, however, must accept that they are not yet ready for such responsibilities. They must surrender their assembly seat for 100 years. The murmurs became shocked silence. That was the real price. Any species desperate enough or foolish enough to try would lose everything when they failed. And everyone would fail. Ashfall 9 was not a planet. It was a death sentence wrapped in volcanic rock. Ambassador Gorith of Earth shifted in his seat. He was old now, his hair completely white, his hands shaking slightly when he tried to hold his datapad steady. Humanity had only joined the assembly 12 years ago. They were still considered children by most species. Their seat was already fragile. He should stay quiet. He knew this. Every logical calculation told him to let some other species take this poison. But Gorith was tired. Tired of being dismissed. Tired of watching humanity get pushed to the edges of galactic politics. Tired of knowing that without something dramatic, his species would fade into irrelevance within a century. He had one card left to play. One name on a list he had kept for years. A man who had lost everything and had nothing left to fear. Before Gorith could speak, footsteps echoed across the platform that a human walked toward the Empress. He was average height, brown hair going gray at the temples, wearing simple clothes that looked more suited for field work than galactic diplomacy. His face was weathered by sun and wind. His hands were rough with old calluses. His name was Daniel Webb, and he had arrived at the assembly hall that morning with nothing but a small bag and a look in his eyes that suggested he had already survived worse than anything the galaxy could throw at him. "I will take it," Daniel said. The Empress paused. Then she laughed. That IT was a genuine laugh, bright and delighted, the sound of someone who had just heard the best joke of their life. Other delegates joined in. The laughter spread across the assembly hall like a wave. Daniel waited. He did not smile. He did not flinch. He simply stood there while 1,000 species laughed at him. When the laughter finally died, the Empress wiped a tear from her eye. "Human," she said, still amused, "do you understand what you're volunteering for? Your species has barely mastered interstellar travel. You have no experience with hostile world colonization. You will die on that rock within a month. Maybe, Daniel said, but I would like to try. The Empress studied him. Something in his calm unsettled her for just a moment. Then she dismissed it. He was one human, one small, fragile, short-lived creature from a forgettable world at the edge of the galaxy. What could he possibly do? Very well, she said. One standard year. If you fail, humanity loses its seat. Those are my terms. I accept. Ambassador Gorath closed his eyes. He did not know if he had just saved his species or doomed them. The Empress gestured for the official documentation to be prepared. As Daniel turned to leave the platform, she called out one last time. Human, is there anything you wish to request before you go to your grave? Daniel stopped. He thought for a moment. Yes, he said. Can I bring seeds? The Empress laughed again. But this time, somewhere deep in her chest, something that might have been doubt flickered briefly before she crushed it. Seeds. What a strange thing to ask for. What a very human thing to ask for. The shuttle pilot refused to cut the engines. 30 seconds, she said through the communication system. That is all you get. Any longer, and the ash will clog my intakes. Daniel grabbed his 2 supply crates and jumped from the loading ramp before the shuttle had fully touched ground. His boots hit black volcanic rock. Heat rose through the soles immediately. The air tasted like sulfur and metal. Behind him, the shuttle was already climbing back toward orbit. Its engines screamed against the poisonous atmosphere. Within moments, it had vanished into the orange-gray clouds above. Daniel stood alone on the surface of Ashfall. 9 that the landscape around him looked like something from a nightmare. Jagged mountains rose in the distance, their peaks glowing red where lava pooled in their craters. The ground was covered in ash and hardened rock flows. Nothing grew here. Nothing moved except the heat waves rising from cracks in the earth. According to official surveys, the average life expectancy of an unprotected colonist on Ashfall 9 was approximately 6 days. Daniel picked up his crates and started walking. 3 hours later, a second vessel descended from orbit. This one was sleek and silver, clearly expensive, clearly designed for comfort rather than cargo. It settled onto the ground with perfect precision, its shields humming to protect it from the environment. A hatch opened and Rena stepped out. She was young for a Velthari, her scales still bright blue rather than the silver they would become with age. She had been assigned to this mission as a punishment for speaking too freely about Dominion policies. Her job was simple: observe the human, document his failure, report back to the Empress when he died. She expected this to take a week at most. Rena activated her observation drone and sent it to find the human while she remained safely inside her shielded pod. The drone located Daniel 2 kilometers away, sitting on a rock formation and staring at the horizon. Subject is stationary, Rena recorded in her log. No attempt at shelter construction. No emergency beacon activated. Possible shock response to hostile environment. She watched through the drone as Daniel pulled out a small device and began taking readings from the ground. He collected samples of ash and rock. He measured wind speed and direction. He tasted the air on his tongue and spat it out with a thoughtful expression. Subject is behaving erratically, Rena noted. Testing soil composition for unknown purpose. As the hours passed, Rena grew increasingly confused. The human did not panic. He did not attempt to build the kind of emergency shelter that all colonization manuals recommended. He did not call for help or curse his situation or weep for his doomed future, that he simply walked. Observed, tested, walked some more. When the sun began to set, painting the ash clouds in shades of blood and fire, Daniel finally stopped near a rocky outcropping. He had not set up a tent. Instead, he wrapped himself in a thermal blanket and sat with his back against the warmest rock he could find. Subject is preparing to sleep in the open, Rena recorded. Survival probability decreasing. That was when the ashling appeared. IT came from the shadows between the rocks, moving with perfect silence despite its size. 6 legs carried a body covered in scales that looked like black glass. Heat radiated from its skin in visible waves. Its head was long and narrow, filled with teeth that glowed faintly orange from internal heat. The creatures of Ashfall 9 were one of the main reasons colonization had failed so many times. They hunted in packs. They could sense body heat from kilometers away. They had killed dozens of colonists from multiple species. Rena prepared to document the human's death. Daniel saw the creature. He went very still. Then, slowly, he lowered himself into a crouch and placed his hands flat on the ground. The ashlings circled him. 1 hour. 2 hours. The temperature dropped as night fell. The creature's internal glow became brighter in the darkness. Daniel did not move. He did not reach for a weapon. He did not try to run. Finally, as the first moon rose over the volcanic mountains, the ashling turned and walked away into the darkness. Rena stared at her observation screen. Subject did not die. She recorded slowly. Reason unclear. She watched as Daniel finally relaxed and lay down to sleep. Before closing his eyes, he looked directly at where her drone was hovering and gave a small wave. The next morning, Daniel continued his exploration. He spent 3 days walking the region, mapping geological features, tracking the movement of ashling packs, noting the patterns of volcanic activity. On the 4th day, he found what he was looking for, that a cave system opened in the side of a dormant volcano. Warm air flowed from its mouth. Daniel explored the tunnels for hours before emerging with a genuine smile on his face. Geothermal vents, he said out loud, knowing Rena was listening. Stable heat, protected from the surface. Water condensation on the walls. He looked up at the drone. This planet is not dead. It is just waiting for someone to understand it. Rena had no idea what that meant. But for the first time since arriving, she felt something she had not expected. Curiosity. 2 months had passed, and Rena was losing her patience. Her reports to the Empress had become increasingly difficult to write. The human was supposed to be dead by now. Instead, he was thriving in ways that made no sense. Every morning, she watched him emerge from his cave shelter, stretch his arms toward the burning sky, and begin another day of what looked like complete madness. Subject continues to collect rock samples, she recorded. Subject spent 4 hours watching a volcanic vent release gas. Subject arranged stones in circular patterns for unknown purpose. Subject has still not constructed any permanent structures. The Empress had responded to her last report with a single word: explain. Rena could not explain. She did not understand what Daniel Webb was doing. The human never seemed to fight against ashfall. 9. He did not curse the acid rain when it fell. He simply noted which direction the wind carried it and moved accordingly. He did not panic when earthquakes shook the ground. He watched where the cracks formed and marked those areas on his maps. He did not try to kill the ashlings that followed him. He left offerings of shiny minerals at the edges of their territory and observed their reactions. It was as if he was trying to learn the planet's language. One morning, Daniel sat outside his cave and arranged a collection of colorful stones in a spiral pattern. Rena's drone recorded everything. She had stopped trying to interpret his actions and simply documented them for later analysis. An ashling approached from the ridge above. This one was larger than the others, its scales marked with pale scars from old battles. Daniel had named it Ghost in his personal logs. Though Rena thought giving names to predators was foolish, Ghost descended the slope and stopped near Daniel's stone arrangement. The human remained still, hands resting on his knees, breathing slowly. The creature studied the stones for a long moment. Then it reached out with one clawed limb and began moving them. The spiral became a different shape, a series of connecting lines that pointed toward the eastern mountains. Daniel watched without moving. When Ghost finished, the creature settled onto the warm ground beside him. They sat together as the sun rose higher. Neither made any aggressive moves. Neither seemed afraid of the other. Rena's claws trembled as she recorded. Subject appears to have established non-hostile contact with native predator species. Communication method unknown. This contradicts all previous studies of ashling behavior. She watched as Daniel slowly reached into his supply bag and pulled out a piece of dried fruit from his rations. He placed it on the ground between himself and Ghost. The ashling sniffed it, decided it was uninteresting, and pushed it back toward Daniel with its snout. The human laughed. The sound echoed off the rocks, strange and warm in this harsh landscape. Ghost made a noise in response, a low rumbling that vibrated through the ground. It was not a growl or a threat. Rena had no category for what it was. The next weeks brought more changes. The Ashlings stopped hiding when Daniel walked through their territory. They began appearing at his cave entrance, watching him work, occasionally bringing him objects. Strange minerals, bones from animals Rena had never seen. Small volcanic rocks with unusual crystalline structures. Daniel accepted each gift with the same calm respect. He arranged them on a shelf inside his cave. He studied them carefully and sometimes used them in his mysterious stone arrangements. He is building a relationship, Rena realized one evening as she reviewed her footage. Not with tools or weapons, with patience. She had been trained to believe that other species were inferior. The Velthari conquered worlds through strength and technology. The idea that someone could win through waiting, through listening, through simple kindness to creatures everyone else considered monsters seemed absurd. And YETWY the end of the second month, Daniel had mapped the eruption cycles of every volcano within 100 kilometers. He knew which underground rivers carried drinkable water after filtering. He had identified 17 species of extremophile plants growing in protected crevices. And he had made friends with the most dangerous predators on the planet. Rena composed a new message to the Empress. Her claws hesitated over the communication panel. Something unexpected is happening, she finally wrote. The human is not dying. He is adapting, and the planet appears to be adapting to him in return. I do not understand how this is possible. Request permission to continue observation from closer range. The Empress's response came within hours. It was not the dismissal Rena expected. Continue observation. Report everything. If a human shows any sign of actual success, inform me immediately. This situation requires careful management. Rena read the message 3 times. Careful management. She knew what those words meant in Velthari political language. If Daniel Webb looked like he might actually win, the Dominion would make sure he lost. She looked at her observation screen. The human was sitting with Ghost again, both of them watching the sunset paint the volcanic clouds in shades of orange and gold. Daniel was smiling. Rena felt something shift inside her chest. A small crack in the wall she had built around her beliefs. She did not report it. Month 5 arrived with the largest volcanic eruption ashfall 9 had seen in decades. Rena watched from her observation pod as a mountain 40 kilometers away exploded. Lava fountains shot into the sky. The shock wave flattened everything within a 15-kilometer radius. Ash clouds blotted out the sun for 3 days. Standard colony structures would have been destroyed. Previous colonizers would have called for evacuation. Their carefully built shelters, designed to resist the environment, would have crumbled under the force of the blast. That Daniel's settlement survived without a single crack. Rena still did not fully understand how he had done it. His buildings looked nothing like proper architecture. They curved instead of standing straight. Half of each structure sat underground, anchored to stable bedrock. The walls were made from volcanic glass and flexible mineral composites that bent when the ground shook rather than breaking. He had not built against the planet. He had built with it. When the ash clouds finally cleared, Rena made a decision that surprised even herself. She put on her environmental suit, left the safety of her observation pod, and walked to Daniel's settlement for the first time. That he was working in a small garden when she arrived. Green plants grew from soil that should have been toxic. Rena stopped at the edge of the clearing, uncertain how to proceed. You can come closer, Daniel said without looking up. The plants will not bite. I cannot promise the same about Ghost, but he seems to like visitors. The large ashling lay nearby, watching Rena with eyes that glowed like embers. It made a low sound in its throat, but did not move to attack. Rena approached slowly. How is this possible? She asked. This soil should kill everything. The radiation levels alone should prevent cellular growth. Daniel held up a handful of dark earth. The ash contains minerals that become nutrients after processing. The trick was finding organisms that could survive the initial toxicity and break down the harmful compounds. Earth has bacteria that live in volcanic vents. This planet has similar life forms. I introduced them to each other. He gestured at the garden. 17 species try to colonize this world. Most of them brought plants that died within weeks. But some of those plants left seeds behind. I found them in the ruins of old settlements. After generations of failed growth, the survivors had started adapting. All they needed was the right soil conditions. Rena knelt beside the garden. Small green, leaves pushed up through black earth. Tiny fruits were beginning to form on some of the stems. Life growing in a place everyone had declared lifeless. You did not fight the planet, she said slowly. You found what it could offer and worked with that instead. Fighting would have killed me, Daniel said simply. Everything that came before me tried to force this world to become what they wanted. They built walls against the lava. They pumped chemicals into the soil to make it suitable for their crops. They killed the ashlings because they saw predators instead of neighbors. He stood and wiped his hands on his worn clothing. This planet was never broken. It was just waiting for someone who would listen. Ghost rose and walked to Daniel's side. The human reached out and rested his hand on the creature's warm scales. The ashling rumbled with contentment. They attacked colonizers because colonizers attacked them first, Daniel said. Every species that landed here saw monsters and reached for weapons. The ashlings learned that visitors meant death. They defended themselves the only way they knew how. Rena thought about her training, about everything she had been taught regarding other species and their inferiority, about the Dominion's approach to colonization, which always meant conquest and control. Why did you volunteer for this? She asked. Your ambassador did not force you. You chose to come here knowing you would probably die. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer than before. I lost my family 3 years ago. A disaster on Earth. I had nothing left to care about. No reason to keep going. He looked out at the volcanic mountains, their peaks glowing against the darkening sky. I thought maybe this place would finally finish what that disaster started. I thought I was coming here to die. What changed? Daniel smiled. The first night, when that ashling circled me for hours and then walked away. It could have killed me easily, but it chose to give me a chance. This world could have killed me 100 times by now. But every time I stopped fighting and started paying attention, it showed me how to survive. He turned to face Rena directly. I came here to die. Instead, I found a home. And I think this planet was as lonely as I was. Rena felt moisture on her scales. Velthury did not cry. Their biology did not allow for it. But something similar was happening inside her, a release of pressure she had not known she was carrying. My Empress will try to stop you, she said quietly. She cannot allow humanity to succeed. I know, Daniel said. I have been expecting that. What will you do? Daniel looked at Ghost. He looked at his garden. He looked at the settlement he had built with patience and observation and respect. Whatever I have to, he said. This is my home now, and I protect what I love. The Velthury soldiers arrived in month 9 with smiles on their faces and murder in their orders. 20 of them descended in a military transport, their armor gleaming silver in the volcanic light. Their commander, a scarred veteran named Drath, presented official documentation claiming they were there to monitor progress and ensure fair evaluation of the colonization effort. Daniel read the documents carefully. His expression did not change. Welcome to Ashfall 9, he said. Try not to provoke the wildlife. Drath smiled without warmth. We are Velthury soldiers, human. We do not fear animals. The sabotage began immediately. It was subtle at first. Water filtration equipment developed mysterious malfunctions. Supply containers were found with small punctures that allowed contamination. Geological sensors gave false readings that led Daniel away from stable ground. Daniel noticed everything. He said nothing. He simply adapted, finding backup water sources and recalibrating his equipment. The soldiers grew bolder. They began patrolling the area around Daniel's settlement, firing their weapons at ashlings who came too close. They called it security protocol. Daniel called it provocation and asked them to stop. Drath laughed at the request. These creatures are dangerous, human. We are protecting you. I do not need protection from my friends, Daniel said. Friends? Drath's laughter grew louder. You have gone native, human. Sad but not surprising. Your species lacks the strength for proper colonization. Rena watched all of this from a distance. She had stopped sending full reports to the Empress weeks ago. Her transmissions now contained only basic observations and careful omissions. She knew she was committing treason. She no longer cared. The breaking point came on a cold morning when the ash clouds hung low and heavy. That a young ashling had been visiting Daniel's garden regularly. It was smaller than the others, curious and playful, always investigating the strange plants with gentle touches of its claws. Daniel had named it Spark for the way its scales flickered with internal light. Spark was sniffing at a flowering vine when the soldiers shot it. The blast came from a patrol on the ridge above. The young creature collapsed without a sound. Its internal glow flickered once and went dark. Daniel heard the shot and came running. He found Spark lying in his garden, its blood soaking into the soil he had worked so hard to make fertile. He knelt beside the small body and did not speak for a long time. Rena arrived moments later. She saw what had happened and felt her world split in two. "It attacked us," the soldier on the ridge called down. "Standard defensive action." Daniel stood slowly. His hands were covered in ashling blood. His face was calm, but something terrible burned in his eyes. "That creature has never attacked anything," he said. "It was barely more than a child." Drath appeared at the edge of the settlement. "Unfortunat accident." These things happen in hostile environments. Perhaps you should return to your cave and let real soldiers handle security. Ghost emerged from the rocks. Then another ashling. Then another. Within minutes, dozens of the creatures had gathered around Daniel's settlement. Their eyes glowed hot with fury. The ground beneath them began to warm. Rena had studied ashling behavior for months. She had never seen them gather like this. She had never felt such anger radiating from their bodies. "They communicate through heat signatures," she realized aloud. "They all know what happened. Every ashling on this continent knows." Drath reached for his weapon. "Finally, some entertainment. I was getting bored waiting for the human to die on his own." "No." Daniel's voice cut through the tension. He walked forward, placing himself between the soldiers and the ashlings. "If you fire on them, they will kill you all, and then they will destroy everything I have built here. Months of work. A chance at real peace between species. All gone because you wanted to prove how strong you are." He turned to face the ashlings. Ghost stood at the front of the gathering, heat pouring off its body in waves that made the air shimmer. Daniel knelt and picked up Spark's body. He carried it toward Ghost and laid it gently on the ground before the massive creature. "I am sorry," he said. "I cannot protect this one. I cannot stop what happened." Ghost looked at Daniel, then at the soldiers. The rumbling from the gathered ashlings grew louder. The ground began to shake. "But killing them will not bring Spark back," Daniel continued. "And it will make you no different from every other species that came here with violence in their hearts." He stood and faced Ghost directly. "Let me try something else. Please." The ashlings went silent. The shaking stopped. Ghost stared at Daniel for a long moment that seemed to stretch into eternity. Then the great creature lowered its head in what could only be a gesture of trust. Rena watched as Daniel turned back toward the soldiers. Behind him stood hundreds of creatures that could kill every Velthary present, and they waited for his word. Drath's face had gone pale beneath his scales. "Leave," Daniel said. "Go back to your transport. Tell your Empress whatever you want. But know this, you're only alive right now because I asked them to spare you. Remember that kindness. I will not offer it twice." The soldiers retreated. They did not look back. Rena remained. Day 365 arrived with clear skies for the first time in Ashfall 9's recorded history. The Galactic Assembly reconvened in the same hall where Daniel Webb had accepted an impossible challenge 1 year ago. Every seat was filled. Every screen in every system across the galaxy carried the broadcast. Trillions of beings watched as Empress Iritha took the central platform. She wore her finest ceremonial robes. Her scales had been polished until they shone like mirrors. Her smile was the smile of someone who had already won. 1 year ago, she announced, a single human volunteered to tame the untamable, to colonize a world that had defeated 17 species. Today, we acknowledge the inevitable result. Ambassador Gorith sat in humanity's section. His hands were steady for the first time in years. He knew something the Empress did not. My observation team has confirmed, the Empress continued, that the human settlement was destroyed by volcanic activity. The foolish attempt has failed, as we all knew it would. Humanity must now surrender their assembly seat according to our agreement. Murmurs filled the hall. Some species looked relieved. Others looked disappointed. A few looked genuinely sad. Then the main view screen flickered to life. The image that appeared was not destruction. It was not a ruined settlement or a dead human. It was a valley. Green stretched across what had been volcanic wasteland. Trees that should not exist reached toward an orange sky. Flowers bloomed in colors that had never been seen on any world. Water flowed in streams that sparkled clean and clear. The center of the valley, stood a settlement of curved buildings that seemed to grow from the earth itself. Smoke rose from chimneys. Gardens surrounded every structure. Children would have played in those streets if any children had been there to play. And standing at the highest point, looking directly into the camera, was Daniel Webb. He looked older than he had a year ago. Weathered, tired, but his eyes were alive in a way they had not been when he first stepped onto the assembly platform. "Hello," he said. "I believe you were expecting someone dead." The assembly erupted. The Empress raised her hand for silence, but no one listened. Finally, she had a shout to make herself heard. "This proves nothing. Where are the colonists? Where is the infrastructure? This is one man with a garden, not a successful colony." Daniel smiled. "You asked me to tame Ashfall, 9. You did not specify how." He stepped aside and the camera view widened. Ashlings filled the valley. Hundreds of them. They moved through the settlement without fear, resting in shaded areas, drinking from the streams, investigating the gardens with gentle curiosity. Rena stood among them, her Velthary armor gone, wearing simple clothes stained with soil. "The previous colonizers tried to conquer this world," Daniel said. "They built walls against its storms. They poisoned its soil. They killed its children. Of course they failed. You cannot tame something by destroying it." Ghost appeared beside Daniel, its massive form radiating heat that made the camera image shimmer slightly. "I did not tame Ashfall, 9. I made peace with it. I listened to what it needed instead of demanding what I wanted. I treated its inhabitants as neighbors instead of obstacles." The Empress found her voice. "This is absurd. You cannot claim successful colonization by befriending animals. The terms of the agreement clearly state that you must establish a functioning colony capable of supporting your species." "Does it?" Ambassador Goreth stood from his seat. He held a data pad displaying the original contract. "I have read these terms many times, Empress. They say the human must tame the planet. They do not define what taming means. They do not specify minimum population. They do not require the destruction of native life." Goreth walked toward the central platform. "Daniel Webb has established a permanent settlement. He has cultivated food sources. He has created sustainable water supplies. He has done everything necessary for long-term habitation. By himself," the Empress shouted. "One man is not a colony." The view screen shifted again. This time it showed a fleet of transport ships entering Ashfall 9's orbit. "Those vessels carry 300 human volunteers," Goreth said. "Geologists, botanists, engineers, all trained in the methods Daniel Webb developed over the past year. They have been waiting for this day." The Empress's silver scales darkened with fury. "You planned this. You arranged everything in advance." "We hoped," Goreth corrected. "We trusted one man to show the galaxy what humanity can do when we stop trying to dominate and start trying to understand." On the view screen, Daniel watched the ships descend. Ashlings gathered around him, curious about the new arrivals. Rena was already organizing landing sites, directing traffic, preparing to welcome the first true colonists of Ashfall 9. "Empress," Daniel said, his voice carrying across the assembly hall, "you gave me this world as a death sentence. You wanted to humiliate humanity and remove us from galactic politics. Instead, you gave us a home." Ghost rumbled beside him. The sound vibrated through the transmission, felt by every being in the hall. "Ashfall 9 has protectors now," Daniel continued. Not soldiers with weapons, but friends who understand it. If the Dominion tries to take this world by force, you will not face one human. You will face a planet that has decided it wants to live. The Empress looked at Daniel. She looked at the ashlings surrounding him. She looked at Rena, her own species, standing with the enemy. For the first time in her very long life, she had no words. Ambassador Gorath smiled. I believe, according to our agreement, humanity retains its assembly seat and gains senior voting rights. The assembly voted. The result was not even close. Months later, Daniel sat on a hillside overlooking the expanding settlement. The first permanent structures were rising. The first children born on Ashfall, 9 were expected within the year. The first diplomatic delegation from another species had requested permission to study his methods. Rena sat beside him. Ghost lay nearby, eyes half closed in contentment. You could go home, Rena said. Back to Earth. You would be a hero there. Daniel watched the sunset paint the volcanic clouds in shades of gold and orange and red. I am home, he said, and the planet he had learned to love seemed to pulse warmly beneath them, as if it agreed.